But we are in this series called Divine Encounters, and I feel like the tagline of this series should be Divine Encounters, we need to talk. Right? Because every time Jesus shows up in the Gospels for one of these divine encounters, every time Jesus talks to someone, he doesn't say, hey, you're doing a great job. Don't change a thing. Keep doing what you're doing. Every single time Jesus shows up and has a conversation with someone, he challenges them. You know, we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, the first week was, are you going to follow him? What are you going to have to leave behind to follow Jesus? Last week, we talked about how Jesus had to break through some barriers with the woman at the well. And if you weren't here for those first 2 sermons, I strongly encourage you to go back. You can go on our YouTube page. You can download our app. Phenomenal sermons and really, really helpful, really tangible messages and takeaways. And so we're going to continue today, and Josh and I didn't plan this at all, just sometimes Jesus does his thing, right? And he preached from John 4 last week, and I didn't know that, and I'm preaching from John 5 this week, and he didn't know that. So God's just like, here we go, we're going to tie these all together. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to John chapter 5. We're going to start right at the very beginning. I'm going to be reading from the Christian Standard Bible. If you have a Bible and it's not that version, it might sound a little bit different. It is just a translation thing. Think of it as like a Texas accent versus a New England accent, okay? We all are saying the same thing, just sounds a little different, all right? And none of us are perfect at grammar, so we don't have the original. But here we go. It's going to be on the screen as well. After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. So not exactly the Summer Splash vibe, right? 5 covered porches with a lot of people who are really sick, and I dare say pretty hopeless. One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" To which the obvious answer would be, every time. I used to do student ministries. I expect participation. And if you don't, I will call you out. Just ask Jamie about his coffee mug, okay? So, do you want to get well? The obvious answer is yes, right? Of course. But this guy goes, "Sir." The disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me." So if you were reading through your Bible, and if you're very observant, you saw that verse 3 was missing. So this is a translation thing. You can talk to me about it after if you're really interested. But what that verse says is that there was believed to be an angel of the Lord who would come and stir up the water and thus provide healing to the first person who entered the pool. We don't know if it was an angel of the Lord. We don't know really what was going on there. Some translations don't even include it. But what you need to know is this man believed that truth. He was staking his whole life on the hope that he could get to the water when the surface began to bubble. And I was a diver in college. I thought it would be a really good idea to try a brand new sport in college. If you're in high school or junior high, don't do that. It's a terrible idea, especially diving. What you might not know is water gives you really good bruises. Fun fact. And so we had this tool that we would put at the bottom of the pool, and when you were learning a new dive, we would turn it on, and it would cause the surface to bubble. And you wanted the bubbles in the water because it broke your fall and stopped you from breaking blood vessels. But this is what this man is hoping for, is that bubbling, right? That gives hope. He's so excited for it, but he can't get there. Classic Jesus. "Get up," Jesus told him. "Pick up your mat and walk." And instantly the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. It's like, peace out, Jesus, thank you. Now that day was the Sabbath, and this is where it gets spicy. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "This is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat." He replied, "Well, the man who made me well told me to do it," right? I see like my kids come out in this. But Cooper did it, right? The man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk. What was I supposed to do? I'd been there for 38 years. Jesus comes along. He's like, bro, get up. Well, actually, what's funny is you read the next verse. Who is this man who told you pick up your mat and walk, they asked. But the man who was healed did not know. So he's like, I don't know. Some bro came up and was like, get up. And I was like, you got it, man, right? This is the Shayna version. Okay. He did not know who it was because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. And you would think, okay, end of story. But we're not done yet. After this, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, see, you are well. Look at that. Do not sin so that something worse doesn't happen to you. And we'll get back to this, but just hold on to that. The man went and reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well, and therefore the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. That is a lot to unpack, which is why I talk fast. We're not going to get the whole thing, but I do strongly encourage you to read through this passage this week, do some digging, see what the Lord wants to speak to you. But I just want to share a few things that stood out to me along the way. The first one that I see is when Jesus approaches this man who has been lame for 38 years. Okay, we're going to do some crowd participation. If you are 38 years old or younger, stand up. Own it. This is good. You're not 40 yet. Okay. The people standing, it had either been the length of their entire lifetime or more that this man had been laying at the pool hoping to get well. You can sit down. There's something about that image of seeing people that are literally the age of the length of time this man had been trying to get well. And I imagine that after 38 years, I don't know, I'm not there yet, but I would imagine that after 38 years of waiting for something, it's all you can focus on. Day after day, this man lays by the pool. We know he has some mobility because he tries to get up, but he never gets there fast enough. He also has no one to help him into the pool, which tells me that he wasn't surrounded by his BFFs or his family. He was left there alone. Watching, hoping, waiting. And so by the time Jesus comes up to him and is like, do you want to get well? The guy I don't even know if that's a possibility in his head. He doesn't even understand the question. He doesn't answer the question directly, but he immediately jumps into why it can't happen. And I see myself in this. And maybe you do too. Do you want to get well? In our terms, it might be, do you want to get in shape? I don't answer yes. I answer, I have 3 young kids. I don't have time to work out. Right? Somebody might ask me, do you want to get your hair done? Well, the obvious answer would be yes, but it's not in the budget, or whatever it might be. We have reasons why these questions that would be an obvious yes answer, reasons why they can't happen, and that's where this man is. Obviously, he wants to get well, but he's so hung up on why he can't. And in a moment, in an instant, Jesus reveals that our way isn't always his way. I was reading through some articles this week, and this sentence stood out to me, and it says, we're more often concerned with survival amidst chaos than with experiencing truth and significance. We are more concerned with survival amidst chaos than with experiencing truth and significance. And Jesus communicated to this man with 2 words, get up. You don't have to live in survival mode. You don't have to hope in the water. You don't have to hope in someone to help you. You don't have to hope in fill in the blank. You simply have to hope in me. And some of you this morning, you could stop listening right now because that's all you need to hear. Is that every reason you have to not follow Jesus, every reason that you have to hold on to hope or to not hold on to hope, falls flat when Jesus says, get up. He has something better, something beyond anything we could ever ask or imagine. But then this story continues, and we see Jesus goes and finds the man, right? Because the man's like, woohoo, I'm healed, and leaves, right? How many times in the Gospels does Jesus heal people, and then you see, and they walked away, and they left, and they, like, you rarely see, if ever, there's one story, right? The 10 lepers and the one returns. But other than that, rarely do you see Jesus perform something incredible, and people are like, I'm gonna chill with you for a while. They're like, peace, I'm out. Right, so Jesus, he knows this guy, and I really think he's wanting him to see this is about way more than a physical healing, right? That's often, Jesus is frequently more concerned with our hearts. Yeah? Okay. So Jesus finds him in the temple, and he's like, check it, you're well, did that, right? He's telling him, I am the man. I know you don't know, you didn't notice, you couldn't find me after, you left, you ran away, but I just want you to know, like, I'm the one who had the authority over your illness, over your excuse. And so because I had that authority to heal you physically, I need you to listen to what I'm going to say. You are well. Stop sinning so that something worse doesn't happen to you. And that sounds ominous, right? Like that almost sounds like a threat. And I don't like that. And so I wrestled with it for a while, and this is what I found out. The Jews who told the man, you're breaking the law by carrying your mat, and Jesus who said, stop sinning, were both focused on something, right? The Jews cared about maintaining control, rules and regulations. This is how the Sabbath should be. And we all kind of have those things that we hold on to. Some of you are freaked out that there's tables in here. Some of you are freaked out that I'm wearing jeans. Some of you are freaked out that, I don't know. Some of you freak out over a lot of things. I'm just being honest. Because we believe that our way is the way it should be. This is the way it's always been. This is the way it should be. This is the way I want it to be. And if you change that at all, I don't like it. And so that's where these Jews are at, is we follow the law. It has been around for a long time. It has done well so far to keep us, in God's good graces. Like we mess up a couple times, but we're not going to talk about that because right now we're concerned with following the law because they wanted to gain control. Jesus, however, called out the man's wrongdoings, right? Stop sinning, which implies he had been sinning at some point. And then he makes this statement, or something worse could happen to you. And Jesus isn't threatening this man. The Jews, the religious leaders, the people so concerned with how they wanted things to go in their synagogue and their rules and regulations, they were the ones who wanted to put this man in his place. Almost a threat. But Jesus says, stop sinning or something worse might happen to you. And what Jesus is saying, you thought that being lame for 38 years was bad? If you walk away and don't really truly know who I am, if you aren't able to follow me, if you are just going to go on living the way that you had lived before, only on 2 feet instead of your bum, you're at risk of so much worse than just being paralyzed. You're at risk of being eternally separated from me, and I don't want that to happen. And so it wasn't a threat as much as it was, please hear my words. I love you, I care about you, and I want what's best for you. And so if you were here last week, Josh talked about the woman at the well in John 4. And this week, we're talking about the man at the pool. And now I'm not going to get off on this whole, like, the woman, did this and the man did that. So this next slide labeled the well versus the pool, so none of you have to get uncomfortable. But there's similarities and there's differences in these two stories. Both encountered Jesus. The woman at the well and the man at the pool. They both encountered Jesus. They both experienced the miraculous. So if you aren't familiar with the story of the woman at the well, Jesus, in fact, told her her whole life story. He had never met her, he had never seen her, he had never heard about her, but he saw her heart and he revealed that to her. And that is a miracle, that a man understood what a woman was thinking. And I wasn't planning on saying that. Okay. And then the man at the pool, right? He experienced a physical healing, a miraculous healing, something that he had been wanting for a really long time. But what we see in the well situation is the woman then listened to what Jesus said to her. She wanted to understand who he was. Whereas the man at the well, at the pool, he just left. Right? And you might be like, well, it says that Jesus disappeared in the crowd. Well, right, because think about it. If Jesus chilled there for a while, how many other people do you think would have bombarded him and probably would have kept him there for days? Right? So he's like, I'm not here just to be a poof, what do you need, genie? I'm here for a divine encounter to teach you a lesson. Right? And then we read in John 4 that because of the woman's testimony, many followed Jesus. So she listened to who he was, what he had to say. She truly allowed herself to have the barriers broken down. And she went and she told her story of what happened. And people from the city flocked to Jesus, getting to experience the same freedom that she experienced. But what we see at the pool is Jesus gives this man the opportunity for that freedom. But instead, whether it was fear or tradition, or he was, I think a big part of it was fear, instead of going and telling people, I couldn't walk for 38 years, and then Jesus showed up, and my life is forever changed, and told me to follow him, and so I'm going to follow him for the rest of my life. Immediately after Jesus says, I care about you, stop sinning. You don't want what could happen if you don't follow me. Like, trust me. The man goes immediately to the Jewish leaders and turns Jesus in. It's almost like he wasn't ready for his worldview to be challenged. He was so focused on, I don't know, we don't know why he was at the temple. My thoughts are that when somebody was healed, they often went to the temple to show themselves to the priest so they could re-enter society. That could be way wrong, but that's my thoughts. He was going there so that he could gain status in the community. And what better way to gain status in the community than to rub shoulders with the religious elite leaders? Because one thing that wouldn't gain you status is making them angry. We all have a worldview. Josh touched on this last week. Depending on where you were born, where you live, how you grew up, where you went to school, what your education level, what your education type, what your career is, your family makeup, all the things, right? Determine how we see the world. It's like when you put on, glasses, like it kind of brings it all into focus. It's the lens through which we see the world. And what we are called to as Christians is a biblical worldview. a lens that we see the world the way that Jesus saw the world. And we only gain that clarity when we understand who he was and how he lived, because your worldview, your behavior, how you live your life is shaped by what you believe. Right? So belief determines behavior. The woman at the well believed that Jesus was the Son of God, and it determined her behavior, whereas the man at the pool, I don't know that he ever fully understood that Jesus was who he said he was, or he wasn't allowing himself to get that, and he turned Jesus in, and Jesus began to be persecuted. And so we see Jesus challenge worldviews at least 3 times in this passage, which I want to kind of go through. So the man at the pool had no one to help him into the pool. And that was his reality. That was his worldview. But Jesus didn't need a pool. The Jews were expecting a conquering Messiah, right? We'll give them a little credit. Jesus was not exactly who they were expecting. They were expecting this warrior king, and Jesus came in as a humble servant. They didn't understand that the way that he was going to conquer death, hell, and the grave was not through a military conquest, but through a crucifixion and a resurrection 3 days later. And the Jews were concerned with their own agenda, whereas Jesus wanted what was best for others. And so we're faced with this kind of comparison and decision. When our worldview is challenged by Jesus, because right at the beginning I said we need a tagline for this series, Divine Encounters, we need to talk. When Jesus says to us, we need to talk, whether that comes through when you're reading the Bible, when you're praying, when you hear a sermon, when you are listening to worship music, when you hear Jesus say, we need to talk, you may not hear those. Wow. If anybody knows anything about DMX lighting, come see me after, because we're having major light issues. Anyways, shoot, where was I? Okay. When we have our worldview challenged, we can respond in belief, or we can respond by running away. Dare I say, betrayal. So like I said, I used to do student ministries, and I love that this person is in the room, and I'm not going to call you out for it right now. But when you work with high school students, middle schoolers, you have to be a little more gentle. But when you work with high school students, they thrive off of like sass, and you actually grow your relationship the more you challenge them. So I have an ongoing debate that is going on probably 8 years with a young woman about whether marching band is a sport or not. And we both are convinced that we're right, and I just don't have the heart to tell her that she's the one who's wrong, right? But what happens when we get into this discussion about marching band is we both get so heated, right? We're like, no, I am right. And she's like, oh no, let me show you proof. And I'm like, oh honey, please. And then she comes back with, well, if you don't think that's a sport, then do you think this is a sport? And I'm like, have you ever tried this sport? If you try that sport, then you'll do this sport, right? And we get, whoo! Emotions fly everywhere. But as this young woman has matured, and dare say as I have matured, we've been able to have a little bit more civil conversations about marching band. She's still wrong, but we've been able to have conversations and talk through things logistically, right? And so when Jesus challenges our worldview, when he says we need to talk, we can respond by freaking out and telling him all the reasons that the ways that we're living and doing our lives are correct, that he doesn't understand what it's like to live in 2024, as if God doesn't live outside of time and space and doesn't understand what we're going through. Different topic, but he gets it. But we come up with all of these reasons why when Jesus says we need to talk, we say, yeah, but if I were to leave my job that pays a lot of money and move to a country to to teach English as a second language, I wouldn't have a very good 401k when I retire. So like, Jesus, I get that you want to talk to me about what it looks like to lay down my life for the least of these, but let me tell you why that's not going to work. Or when Jesus says to us, hey, we need to talk because you've been sitting in services for quite a while now, and you're just gonna get lazy and you're just gonna get fat because you're not doing anything with your spiritual walk. You're just consuming everything and you're not actually sharing it. So you're just filling up, right? Like I think of it like Willy Wonka with the blueberry girl, right? Like she just keeps consuming and she just keeps expanding, right? She's just this like blueberry balloon. And my fear is that some of us sitting in this place this morning are becoming a Bible balloon. And you listen and you nod and you answer me when I make you. But really, we're getting to the point where we're just going to have to like roll you out of here. Because all you're doing is consuming. And Jesus says, hey, we need to talk. Because what you've learned over the past X amount of months or years, there's someone who could benefit from that. And I want to use you, but it's going to be a little uncomfortable. And we have all of our reasons why I could never volunteer in kids' church, and I could never be a first impressions person, and I could never do tech because I'm not techie, and I could never do this, and I don't want to wake up. God's on my side this morning. I don't want to wake up like early on a Sunday because that's my only day to sleep in, and like I have little kids. Well, if Caleb leading worship with a baby strapped to him doesn't tell you anything, okay? We have all of the excuses in the world. And I used to make it my goal, fun fact, when I preached, I used to make it my goal to make at least one person cry. It's just fun. I was young, dumb, and stupid, and good at it. But so my husband goes, "Are you going to make them cry today?" I said, "No, but I think Jesus is going to make some of them real uncomfortable." And I think that's the whole point of these divine encounters. When Jesus invited us to follow him, he didn't say, "Get in my stretched limo, I'll have the cocktails ready, kick up your feet, and I'll let you know when we're going to go and like toss pennies to orphans along the side of the road." When the woman at the well experienced Jesus, she didn't allow any excuse she had to stop her from declaring the praises of him who brought her out of darkness and into his glorious light. And some of us are getting really good at excuses. For 38 years, we've been seeing life through one lens, and when Jesus challenges our worldview, we don't like it. Instead of listening to what he has to say or following or accepting the invitation that he's giving us, we just focus on our problems. Well, if I do that for someone else, then who's going to help me? I have to watch out for number one. We miss who he is, right? We create a picture of who we want Jesus to be that fits our worldview rather than allowing Jesus to shape our worldview by who he is. Like when we say, "Who is Jesus to you?" people have taken that and they've taken a highlighter and they've taken a Sharpie and they cross out the things in Sharpie that they don't like in Scripture, and they've highlighted the things that help their arguments, and they say, "This is who Jesus is to me," when in reality we're saying, "Who is Jesus to you? How has he changed your life?" We're not asking for the parts of him that you do and don't like. We're saying, where has he taken the parts of you that he doesn't like? And where has he Sharpied out your old beliefs and highlighted what he has for you? We need to flip the script or we're going to miss who he is, and we're going to miss what he offers. John, a little bit later in chapter 10, one of the verses that we use with our students all the time because it's so clear and it's so beautiful and it's so simple. And I challenge you to memorize it, write it on a 3x5 card, put it somewhere this week where you're going to see it, get your lipstick when you get home and write it on your mirror. It washes off eventually, if you wash your mirror. John 10:10. The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But I have come so that you may have life and have it abundantly. So you get to choose the life that you want. Are you going to allow the thief to steal, kill, and destroy? Or are you going to surrender and humbly accept the invitation to get up and experience life abundantly? So we can miss Jesus, we can miss who he is, what he wants to do, and focus on our problems, or we can listen to what Jesus said when he said, sin no more or something worse might happen to you, and we can take that and we can pursue holiness and the likeness of Jesus. Because remember, what we believe determines how we act. What we fill our minds with, what we fill our hearts with, determines the way in which we live out our lives. I think I've shared this before, but there are certain TV shows that if I watch them too often, or if I binge watch them, my heart just becomes filled with anxiety. And it's the show's not inherently bad, but there's just something about it that twists my brain into this drama mentality, and I just feel my anxiety going. But you know when that doesn't happen? When I put on Bluey for my kids in the morning, and I sit down at my table with my very large cup of coffee, and my Bible and my journal, and instead of allowing Hulu and Netflix to fill my brain, I say, Jesus, I want you to fill my brain. So how do we do this? How do we pursue holiness in the likeness of Jesus? Literally, I give y'all the same next steps every time I preach because that's what it's all about. Get to know him. Open his word. I've been meeting with so many individuals, and the number one theme, and it's not to make them feel bad or whatever, but when I ask, what are you learning from Scripture? It gets real quiet. Because we get to a point where we're yeah, I know Jesus, he knows me, we love each other, we're tight. So what has he taught you recently? What is he teaching you now? Go get your Bible and open it up. Because God has a desire to speak to you and to fill your life to abundance. He has given us everything we need, but we often don't utilize it. It's like having a spare tire, and then you get a flat, and somebody's well, put the spare on it, and you're no, God's got me. God gave you the tool to fix your car. So when we say, life's really hard, but man, I'm just going to trust Jesus, yes, you should, but also, how do you even know who he is? What do you know what he wants to speak into your life? How do you know how to respond if you aren't opening up his word and listening to him, getting to know him? You cannot be like someone you don't know. But the more time you spend with someone, the more you become like them. Learn to recognize his voice. This one is hard for me. I will tell you, this one is the absolute hardest for me when it comes to spiritual disciplines. I don't like quiet, clearly. I love to have my worship music going and have, the podcast on, and like when I'm showering, like I have music blaring and my kids are like, Mom, and I'm like, I will sing of the goodness, right? Like, we're just, my kids are safe, I promise. But like, I don't like any quiet in my house. Like Spotify is on, or I have my headphones in, or if you come into the church during the week, like you can hear my music from the lobby because I have issues, and I like it really loud. And there's nothing wrong with worship music, and there's nothing wrong with podcasts that point you to Jesus. But if you're constantly listening to what someone else says about him, you are not listening to him. If I am constantly just receiving from Josh or from a podcast or from a worship leader who God is and what he says about me, it's like a game of telephone. And I'm only hearing what the person before me wants to tell me. How do I learn to recognize his voice? You shut the other ones up. And it's so hard. It's so hard to embrace the silence and solitude that comes with listening and learning to hear the voice of God. But I can tell you there is nothing that compares to the peace that comes when you silence the noise and listen for the one who loves you more than anything. The third one, don't go at it alone, right? You're like, Shana, you just told me to shut everybody up. Yes, do that first. Then go find people who are going to help you on your walk. I mentioned earlier when Jesus heals people, we don't see a lot of those people follow him. A lot of those people were alone when he healed them. I bet if the disciples, rather than being like, hey, come pick up your mat, had been like, hey, come with us. Come on the road with us. Come get to know Jesus like we do. Obviously we find out people did that. He wouldn't have preached to 5,000 men plus women and children if people weren't inviting others to follow them. We need people in our life to call us out, to have the hard conversations, to say, what is God wanting to talk to you about? What is God challenging you in? We need people. We need godly counsel. And I'm not saying you should have, like need, necessity. I've started, like I said, I've met with a lot of individuals, and it has been so amazing to get to know people that I've just seen for years, to hear the stories of how God is working in and through their lives, to help them find a place to connect and to serve. And you might be sitting here like, I don't even know where to start. That's okay. I would love to have a conversation with you. I would love to sit down. I will drink coffee. You are welcome to or not. If you don't, I don't understand you, but it's fine. And I want to hear what God's doing in your life. And if you're like, God's not doing anything in my life, I want to help you see what God is doing in your life. I sent out in an email a while back, which if you didn't get it, check your spam. And if you really didn't get it there, then make sure your email's on your communication card, with a spiritual formation survey. It's a great place to start, to just be like, where am I in my faith? And then we get to have a conversation. It is the biggest honor of my life to be able to walk with you as you pursue Jesus. I don't have all the answers, but I know the one who does, and I'd love to help you get to know him better too. And finally, we need to surrender our worldview. That biblical worldview that I talked about, a Barna study showed that a very, very small percentage of people who attend church and call themselves Christians actually see things through a biblical worldview. Do you know what that means? That means that a lot of people come to church and a lot of people leave and do nothing about it. A lot of people come to church and raise their hands and sing out and worship, but then they go and they hang out with the Jews, or they go and they do their own thing, and they leave Jesus here. But I want to challenge you that as you get to know him through his word, as you get to listen to his voice in solitude, silence, and prayer, as you get to know him through the godly counsel around you and your friends, I want to encourage you, challenge you, beg you to stop gripping so tightly to the things that are holding you back from surrendering everything to Jesus. Because this is the truth. Romans 12:2 says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and perfect and pleasing. You know what the best part of this all is? Let God transform you by changing the way you think. It's not how good you are. It's not how good you can get. It's the way that you respond to the question, do you want to get well? And so the band is going to lead us out with a song that it's labeled Come Alive. That's the title. And this is your invitation today. Are you going to allow the Spirit of God to come alive in you? Are you going to lay down what you've been gripping so tightly to? Are you going to believe that God can do something new and fresh and beautiful in what feels like a really tough, long, meaningless season? Have you been sitting by the pool for 38 years? And Jesus is asking you today, do you want to get well? Do you want to experience life and life to the full? Because I have it for you. All you have to do is get up and follow me.